We are so far removed from the idea of America and its minarchism written in the United States Constitution, where we have to bring her back to where she belongs. Thank you for listening to this episode of Chasing Life, Liberty, and Minarchy. Welcome back to Chasing Life, Liberty, and Minarchy. I am your host, Mr. Roderick Threets. And for 6 episodes, 6 weeks, we've talked about 2 different paths to liberty, haven't we? We've mastered and curated the slow, strategic work of incrementalism. We've explored the cultural power of the revolutionary path. We even discussed the most effective strategy being the blend of both incrementalism and revolutionary, right? But today, we confront the inevitable. We are no longer discussing how to build the free society, but how the established powers, will fight back to prevent it. This episode here shifts from strategy to conflict, right? As we examine this episode, the final battle, the state's last stand, okay? And this is where it's going to be at, right? We will look at the sophisticated, often unseen ways in which the government, the state, the permanent bureaucracy, meaning the regulatory and administrative state, and the powerful corporate interests seek to crush both incremental and revolutionary threats to their system. This is the ultimate test of the iron law of oligarchy. Before we get started, make sure you guys are liking and subscribing and all that stuff to this show. As we get the other shows ironed out because of technical difficulties of the internets and all that stuff. But we're going to be back on track here real soon. I promise you. I promise you. No lies being told here. But make sure you like and subscribe and all that good stuff. Make sure you're checking us out on Patreon, patreon.com/TOLMF. In that regard, thank you. I appreciate it. And make sure you follow us on all the things. You can find me if you happen to be on TikTok, you can find me Man of Justice 007 on the TikTok, and all that good stuff too. If you want to follow me when I'm live or whatever, come on through like kung fu. With that, let's get into this because this is going to be short but not long, but short enough for comprehension purposes. I actually rewrote this episode literally 4 times. Right, because I usually here's for this show when I do these series like this, my first thing is always dictating, to my phone or the tablet, whichever I have within close proximity of me, dictating things off of my head into scribed, right, into text, right, and then I'll turn around and throughout the week I'll try to refine it on the fly. At different intervals in time, I try to refine it on the fly. And this revision here for this one went through four changes. 2 of them just today alone to shorten the show to almost 50 minutes. Because y'all know me, I like to run my mouth and put all of it out there, and a lot of it needs explaining before presented. So So we got it narrowed down to 50 minutes. So it's a long show, not too long of a show, a short show, but you get the point. So that's a day in the life of me writing this particular show anyway, because it takes a lot, right, to make sure the information is all correct. But We're here, right? So part one of this, there's five parts to this, if I remember correctly. Um, Let me make sure. No, there's four parts to this, and it's not going to be long, but it's going to be short enough, like I said before, right? So part one of this segment one of this, I call it the counterattack on incrementalism. Okay, the political fight back. Okay, now the most immediate threat to the established order comes from successful incremental victories. I think we all agree. And the state's counterattack is strategic and relentless. Let me put that into real world American constitutional republic language. Okay. As we get little wins through legislation on the local and state levels, right? Or let's even go there. Ballot initiatives is a great one, right? You can have a ballot initiative like here in Florida, right? It was Amendment 4. Amendment 5 was for the marijuana, right? Now, even if Amendment 5 would have passed and the people spoke, we want marijuana to be free and clear. The state can come back. Even though the voters wanted the initiative, the state will come back with its own counterattack by amending what the ballot initiative was or the constitutional amendment to word it a certain way. This is how the state fights back. They use language to fight back, right? And that's with almost any ballot initiative in any state when we look at it, because the ballot initiative may pass on plain text face, but then the state legislature still has the authority to amend that that ballot initiative or that constitutional amendment to fit quote unquote within government means, right? This is what I'm talking about, the counterattack, right? Let's use something that I've talked about. I talked about in episode 2, right? Episode 2. You remember when I mentioned Tabor, TABOR, Taxpayer Bill of Rights in Colorado, right? That constitutional amendment, okay, passed in 92, I think 92, right? And it is the definitive incremental victory for fiscal restraint, right? The political establishments, watch this, the political establishment, if you go read today, right? I've heard Miss Trish say it, and I've heard other Coloradans say it, but I heard it from her first. She said, we was talking about Tabor, and she was talking about debrucing Tabor, right? Bruce is the guy that wrote Tabor, right? And they're talking about debrucing Tabor, right? Um, That's their attack, to repeal Tabor, right? Which would be actually difficult, right? Because you'd have to aggressively lobby against it, and they don't have that kind of, the Democrats, even though they control the state, don't have that kind of power, right? Because we have to think about this, right? The timeline, this is post 1992 after Tabor passed in Colorado, right? And Democrats have long tried to circumvent the law on many different bases, right? This even involves public campaigns funded by state aligned interest, right? To convince voters that their schools and roads are crumbling because of fiscal limits. You hear the lie. See, this is what the state does. This is the propaganda, the lies, right? They want people to they want people to stand up to repeal Tabor, right? Or not, technically it's not a repeal, it's an abolishment, because it's a constitutional amendment. You repeal laws, but you abolish amendments. I want people to understand that. You just don't repeal amendments. That doesn't work, right? The language doesn't work. You repeal laws and statutes, but you abolish amendments, right? Because you have to pass another amendment to abolish the original amendment, aka, should we go back, the 18th Amendment was abolished by the 21st, right? Right. That's what I'm, that's where we are. It's never repealed, right? Um But with that being said, Colorado is lying to their voters by saying their schools and their roads are crumbling because of fiscal limits. We all know that's hot garbage, right? Because if I remember correctly, Colorado collects an excise tax on fuel, which goes to the road tax item line in the budget. A lot of people don't know that. Your state excise tax on fuel goes to the road, it goes to your road budget, goes to your road maintenance budget line item or fund, whichever way it is set up. Don't let these people fool you. Don't let these people fool you with these lies when they talk about these certain things, right? You pay a tax to drive on that road, that asphalt out in front of your house that is so pretty. You pay the tax at the pump for that. Same thing with schools, people. How are your schools funded? Property taxes within the district you're living in. Don't let these people fool you and tell you a lie that the states, my Coloradans especially, that, oh my God, our schools can't be repaired because, no, stop. Your property taxes pay for schools and the rebuilding of the schools, depending on the district you're in. That's where it goes, whatever district. And your roads are maintained by the road tax, the road fund, DOT fund in your budget, which comes from excise tax from fuel specifically. Stop the cap. But this is how they lie to you. This is how they lie to you to convince you, right? They talk to you like you're stupid. And that's even here in Florida too. They talk to you like you stupid. But when you put their foot on the hot iron rod and they start tap dancing like stop tap dancing like it's a minstrel show, you know they lying. You know they lying, right? But anyway, I digress off that point. Don't fall for the banana in the tailpipe, people, right? But what the other things they try to do, right? The politicians in particular, right? They try to seek voter approved exceptions to the law, asking citizens to temporarily allow the state to keep the refund money, right? Effectively chipping away at the law's power. So, in other words, what they'll do is say, well, hey, we need this extra money because we have to go fix Interstate 80 coming, again, Colorado, because Tabor's in Colorado, right? To help fix Interstate 80. Right, I'm just throwing it out, even though that's a federally funded road, and the money goes to the state DOT to maintain the interstate. Right, we know that, right? But they'll tell you that little lie, like we need an extra money to do this, right? And then when the voters give them approval to do that, what says they'll go to the legislature? Well, the voters already gave us the power to keep some of the refund money. Why not just we hold all of it for this and this and this project? Effectively, they're not right. If they pass laws like that, effectively, they're not repealing Tabor, right? They've just rendered it innate by passing other laws because the people allowed them to pass the laws to do it. This is another way they get around all that, right? So you got to pay attention to what your officials are telling you, how they're telling you, and where they so-called pulling the authority from. So those are on any state. When you hear a politician start talking out of the side of their neck, well, just give us a little bit here because we need it for this. You ask them, where do you have that authority? You ask them flat out, where do you derive that authority from? Show me where you get that authority from. 9 times out of 10, they can't tell you because it's a talking point to usurp your power, the power of your restraint on the state government. I wish every state that has a state income tax should have a Tabor amendment in their constitution. They really should, instead of states being able just to hold on to the money in surplus and spend it whichever way they feel fit. No, that's garbage. You should have just enough to fund the state and you give the rest back to the people. All of it, not some of it, all of it, and don't beg for it back. Anyway, anyway, right? What they're trying to do in Colorado with Tabor, right, is to make fiscal liberty seem morally wrong. And that's what gets my goat about that, right? The taxpayers fund you guys in Denver. They fund you, but then when you want to hold restraints upon the government that is supposed to represent them, they'll tell you, no, you are morally wrong for trying to uphold fiscal liberty, right? What the state, the politicians are doing is actually attacking the legitimacy of the actual victory of Tabor through propaganda and demeaning means. It's a psychological operation, right? Let's go back to more in episode 2, right? In episode 2, we talked about occupational licensing, right? Right? The subversion of the regulatory repeal. See, when folks, I'm gonna throw this out there. When folks like us get regulations repealed, like let's say the sunset clauses, right? We talked about in episode 2, right? The permanent bureaucracy, right? Which is often guided by the iron law of oligarchy, right? Yeah, I remember we talked about that, right? And it fights back using what I call regulatory capture as its primary weapon, right? Remind you, this is a process, if you don't remember, right? This is the process where even a licensing board, right, is reformed. The largest and the most established firms immediately lobby to have the reforms watered down for new similar regulations put in their place. For example, right? A state might loosen occupational licensing for interior designers, right? But the professional associations immediately lobby for a mandatory, high cost private certification endorsed by the state, right? See, this type of subversion ensures that the barrier to enter remains high and new competitors are shut out, right? Right. These occupational licenses, right? And y'all have heard me say it before, right? These occupational licenses puts a restraint on capitalism. It's no longer a free market, right? When we say when people talk about free market capitalism, right, and things of this nature, right? How is it free? And these are for the this is for the people that scream, right, including the communists that say capitalism's bad, it's bad in its end phase, and for the people that my conservative friends that are hold strong economic ties, all this stuff that holler free market capitalism, right? How is how do you have free market capitalism, right, when it's being regulated by the state? I want y'all to honestly answer that question to yourself or answer it in the chat. How can how can people say that we want free market capitalism, but the state holds control of occupational licensing, hence regulating capitalism, right? Because if you need an occupational license to enter into capitalism, okay, you can go ahead. You can no. No, just like the kid on the side of the road that sells bottles of water. In some jurisdictions, you got to have a license to sell that bottle of water you just bought from Walmart on the side of the road. You got to purchase a license to participate in capitalism. So again, how is it a free market capitalism in the words when you got to purchase a license to participate in the free market? It makes no sense, does it? But this is what the government has propagandized with everybody, right? It's either capitalism, which is ran by regulation, aka in this instance, occupational licensing, or it's a true free market where everybody can do whatever. Now, I get the people in the middle that says we have some sort of regulations on it because this, that, and the third. Let the free market work that out. If you're, for example, if you're a bad beautician, people ain't coming to you and word of mouth is going to destroy your business. Meanwhile, if you're providing great service, you're gonna hear it. Word of mouth. Go to this lady to braid your hair. This is how the free market, this is how it's supposed to work. This is how it is supposed to work. Not the state barricading you from capitalism. Because at the end of the day, let's go back a second. Let's go back to 2020, end of 2020, in the beginning of 2021, right? How people were losing their occupational license because they wanted to cut someone's hair, Michigan. Hmm? They said you cannot participate in capitalism because we're under a pandemic. We're shutting down the. No, we didn't. Remember the Democrats, we didn't shut down the economy. Yes, you did when you told people that had occupational licenses they could not participate in their trade to make money to feed their families. You told them to shut up, sit down, we're taking your license from you. If it was a free market, yeah, you can do whatever you please in that market. And the market will weed you out. If you're good or bad, it will weed you out. Right. And I don't want to get too far in the weeds on that. Right. But that's my point. You can't have free market capitalism when you need a license to participate in capitalism. Right. It makes no sense, right? But that's how the bureaucracy wins. That's how the bureaucracy chooses winners and losers, right? This is how the big investment not investment, but the big firms or the authoritative agencies over said sectors of the economy, right, makes it hard for people to get into that field. Like I explained with interior designers, right? They make the cost of getting a license so much that common Joe like me and you can't even break into the field. We have great ideas, but we can't break into the field because we got to pass a test that costs $1,500, for example, right? They make it hard. And once you get in, they outbid you on everything. It doesn't make it worth it in the end. And this is the state. This is the state, right? Even though the regulation is gone, right, in this instance, as we explained, the competitive bear still exists, preserving all of the established interest. There's no freedom in that, is it? We're gonna go on into part two here, right? I call part two of this the co-option of the revolutionary path via the cultural fight back, right? Now, keep in mind the state understands that it cannot ban a good idea, right? So its next strategy is to co-opt it, right? To assimilate the revolutionary idea, dilute the power of it, and then bring it under government control. We hear this all the time where, oh yeah, so and so co-opted this saying. This is the government does this all the time. They do it all the time, right? There's one example: co-opting parallel institutions, right? Now, in episode 3, right, we talked about the power of parallel institutions like health sharing ministries and things of that nature, right? The state's counterattack to that is usually a one of regulation, right? Which I call, and I've heard other people call it in other libertarian circles, right? Libertarian economic circles as embrace, extend, and extinguish, right? So what the governments will wait, okay, until the alternative is successful. Then they'll introduce legislation, right, to regulate it under the guise of consumer protection. Now, let's go. You heard what I said, right? Now, watch this. Remember that four-letter agency, CFPB? You remember that? If you're in the chat, put a one in the chat if you remember CFPB and when it was what its purpose was. before I go on here. Okay, so I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go on because we are always on time constraint, right? But the CFPB, right, was created out of Dodd Frank, right? The Dodd Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2010, right? Because remember, in 2008 we just had that financial crisis, right? Which was fueled by reckless and predatory lending practices, right? Particularly in the mortgage industry, right? CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That was the Elizabeth Warren was the director of that at one point, right, under Obama, right? That's when it all started. And the purpose of the CFPB was to protect consumers from unfair, deceptive, and abusive practices by financial institutions, right? Now, back to where we were, now that we understand where we're at here in this, right? So when Occupy Wall Street did their thing, right, and all that happened, and all the ideas that they had were actually per se, they went back into their respective states, and they certain states passed legislation for this, that, and the third. Well, they created Dodd Frank. Dodd Frank created this agency to kind of do the same thing, to stop the predatory lending, quote unquote, right? Or in the name of fair markets, right? Right. But what they ended up doing, right? They created the CFPB and told you, right? They created it under the guise of consumer protection, CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, right? They told you in the name what they were doing, right? Right. And remember, right? Let's go forward, right? Because post 2010, right after the Affordable Care Act, right, that pushed health sharing into the national spotlight, right? Right? See what they did? We had all these health sharing ministries and all that stuff you can sign up for, HSAs, all that good stuff that was private. Then the government says, "Oh, we want to take a part of this." Right? So what the state did was that they attempted to subject the voluntary low overhead institutions to the same bureaucratic costs and rules as the established system, right? Often crippling a lot of times the new model financial advantage. Let me give you an example of that. That sounds convoluted, right? If you were not on Obamacare, right? Remember, if you weren't on Obamacare and didn't sign up for it, you got fined. At the same time, you being fined for not signing up for Obamacare, right? Your regular insurance premiums, like for example, I had Blue Cross Blue Shield, right? My premium tripled under Obama. And I'm sure everybody else has at least doubled under the ACA, right? This is what I'm talking about. I hope that statement I made and the example I gave made that clear on what they did, right? This is the actual state neutralizing the competitor by forcing it to adapt to the cost structure of the failing state model, right? Because remember, now everybody in the insurance market is competitive now, right? So I want to I'm gonna go here a second. So all of you fans of the Luigi Mangione, right? You're fans of this guy that shot the United Healthcare CEO. Please remember, you went after the wrong enemy, Luigi. You attacked the wrong enemy, Luigi. And all your fans, you attacked the wrong people, Luigi fans. Instead of directing your focus on the CEO of a company, your focus should have been on the government because the government created the unequal balance in healthcare by lowering the premiums down to where the state stays competitive and gives you shitty healthcare. These private agencies give you better healthcare, but because of the ACA, it dropped the quality of healthcare and it raised the prices of premiums. But you Leo Mangione fans, y'all go on off. Y'all go off and not go to the source of the problem. You go kill an innocent man in the middle of the street in the name of healthcare justice. No, you're all fucking idiots is what you are. And the state will continue to enlarge itself and make your healthcare fucking poor as hell until you realize what they're doing to you. You're going to be on the side of the road acting like a fentanyl fiend because you let the government price you out of your health care and your health care premiums and insurance. You let them pass them instead of you out here praising somebody, some CEO that is going to be replaced within minutes to run the same company you're mad at when you're not supposed to be mad at that company. You should be mad at the government for lowering the standards of healthcare. But you will continue to be idiots, and they'll continue to be fentanyl fiends falling asleep, stand up against the wall on corners like heroin addicts and coke addicts walking down the street and needles up and down your sidewalks and roads because these poor people got priced out of their health care and lost their jobs because of it. But what do I know? I'm a guy that sits behind a microphone 4 times a week and tell you the truth for what it is. And if you don't like it, I guess I don't know what reality you're living in, but you need to get to the real one and fight the real enemy. But anyway, I digress. Now, when we talk about the state co-opting the technology revolution, right? Remember, the state can't ban cryptocurrency, right? Remember, we examined this revolutionary force in episode 4, right? But it can control its on ramps and off ramps, right? Let me explain. The attack on the currency revolution involves imposing severe know your customer and anti-money laundering rules on the exchanges and traditional banks that deal with crypto, aka remember the PayPal $500 or more. You got to tell us if $500 or more is being exchanged. That part, that I know y'all remember that part, right? Because what ends up happening is those 2 laws forces decentralized money back into the heavily regulated centralized banking system, doesn't it? Right? Restoring the state's ability to monitor and potentially seize assets, right? Now, mind you, let's go past 2015, 2017, right? After Bitcoin and Ethereum and all of these Bitcoin types, cryptos, got mainstream growth, right? Governments right now are still actively developing their own CBDCs or central bank digital currencies to try to counter this, right? AKA Joe Biden's executive order that thank God Trump wrote off and shut down, right? This in itself, the United States creating a CBDC out of an executive order, right? This is what's crazy. Because Congress is the one supposed to dealing with monies in every different ways, right? The government should not be interfering with what the people are doing. That's another show for another day I need to do. But this CBDC thing is the ultimate co-op, right? Adopting the technology of digital currency and creating an ultimate centralized tool of surveillance and control. I don't see where I told a lie. And I hope you guys kind of see it too, where how this regulatory state keeps us behind bars, right? Part 3, next to the last part. We'll be getting out of here shortly. Remember, if you haven't liked or subscribed to this, please pull up and do the things, click the things, all that good stuff, right? Patreon.com/TOLMF. Thank you. We're on part 3 now. The state's last stand, the existential fight back. Okay. When everything fails, right, the state will always resort to its core function, the use of force and the manufacturing of consent, a challenge that tests the principles of the iron law of oligarchy. If you remember that, let's go back to episode 3 for the iron law of oligarchy and listen at that part of it. It's right around like the 15, 16-minute mark, if I remember correctly. Um, so how does the state manufacture consent? This is good, right? Because we know how they do it, but I'm going to make it very simple, right? So the state's number one weapon to manufacture consent is propaganda, right? This is the cultural fight to delegitimize any attempt to shrink the state, right? Politicians and their aligned media outlets frame any pro liberty or pro conservative movement as extreme, irresponsible, or a threat to democracy. Sound familiar, don't it? Right? For example, right? The efforts to promote school choice, like we talked about in episode 2, right, are framed as not. Wait, let me take that back. They're not framed as empowering parents, but as an attack on public education and destroying the common good, right? Or even to some point called domestic terrorist, right? Destroying public terror and domestic terrorists, right? This cultural war, right, ensues. The public demands the continued existence of the system fulfilling the state's survival imperative. This insanity is past insanity. Now, the ultimate use of control or force, right? This final battle will occur when the state believes its fundamental monopoly is challenged, right? For example, if the free, remember we talked about the Free State Project in New Hampshire, right? If they were to succeed in achieving political dominance in New Hampshire, or if a decentralized governance model were to achieve critical mass, the response would likely escalate beyond regulation, right? We've seen that, right? The timeline is, this timeline is hypothetical or future oriented, right? The state's ultimate move is to deploy the tools of coercion, right? This could involve shutting down internet infrastructure or attacking the information revolution, right? We talked about in episode 3, right? Using financial surveillance or, in the most extreme cases, deploying state force against political opponents in an attempt to extinguish the threat to the iron law of oligarchy and reassert its monopoly on violence. This is all real. This is all real. As we close out, right, we have to forge a path through the battle, right? So I'll ask, what is the lesson? And this is something you guys can go back and listen to and listen to previous episodes. But this is something I want to throw out there before I give you my comments on this, right? What is the lesson of the final battle? I want you to think about that a second. For me, it's this, right? The path to Minarchy is not just a journey of building, okay, but it's a constant, perpetual struggle against institutionalized power. Every incremental victory that we get in every decentralized institution will be met with a counterattack from the state. We know that. Now, Next question is, how do we survive the final battle? Right? How do we survive the final battle against the state? Two things: redundancy and perpetual vigilance, right? With this, we have to embrace the two prong strategy. And there's going to be people out of us that hear this, listen to this, right? Some of us are revolutionaries, and some of us are incrementalists, right? Me personally, I can do both, right? Some people can't do both, right? But choose a path, right? But as a whole, we should embrace the two prong strategy, right? Because you can use incrementalism to buy time and provide a legal shield for the revolutionary projects, right? For example, right? Passing laws, let's say, that protect cryptocurrency and homeschooling from state regulation. Another thing that comes to my head is building decentralized tools, right? You can use technology to create systems that are anti fragile, for a lack of a better word, and continue. No, was it? No, we can't continue. How about that? Yeah, let's create systems that are anti fragile and cannot be easily co opted or destroyed. Okay. The more peer to peer and code base as the solution is, the harder it is to control, right? And another thing that pops in my head, that the one thing that the American political left is doing is winning the cultural war, right? They're winning the cultural war for the most part, right? So we have to, if, in order to get us back to, again, to survive this final battle, we have to prioritize cultural victory, right? Because we have to understand that the state's true power lies in the minds of the people, right? The most effective defense against tyranny is a population that values individual liberty and mutual aid, as we talked about in episode 5 or 6, probably 6. I think mutual aid 6. Can't remember off the top of my head. More than government security, right? Keep in mind, people, the battle for liberty will never truly end. And by understanding the strategies of the opposition, we can ensure that we're always ready for the next phase of the fight. That's the end of this episode. Next time, on the final episode of this, episode number 8, we will synthesize the entire series, all 7 episodes, into a unified vision for what I'm calling the path forward, a synthesis for the future. Remember, guys, like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff on all your social media stuff. Comment on the comment section on the video. If you have questions, you can always send me your questions on Patreon, all that stuff. Or if you have my personal number, you know you got that too. You can send your message, send your questions there. Also, remember, I'm gonna need y'all to love your neighbors. I'm gonna need y'all to make sure you love your families, but ultimately, you gotta love yourself. Until then, stay vigilant and keep chasing life, liberty, and minarchy. Until next time, y'all. Peace and love.